I'm Gilbert Cruz, editor of the New York Times Book Review, and this is the Book Review Podcast. We're back from our brief Labor Day hiatus. I hope you had some time off. I hope you used some of that time to maybe read a book or two. The fall season is finally upon us, and I can tell you it's about to get very crowded book-wise. So if you need a bit of guidance in terms of what to look forward to, you should definitely check out our fall previews at nytimes.com. We'll tell you about the fiction, poetry, nonfiction that should definitely be on your radar over the next few months. And one of those books, if you're a mystery fan, will likely be Death at the Sign of the Rook by Kate Atkinson. This is the sixth novel starring Atkinson's beloved private eye, Jackson Brodie. And on this week's episode, Sarah Lyall, who's fresh off many weeks covering the Paris Olympics, speaks with Atkinson about her new novel.
I'm Sarah Lyall with the New York Times Book Review, and I'm delighted to have on the podcast today the British writer Kate Atkinson, the author of numerous novels and short story collections. Her debut novel, Behind the Scenes at the Museum, won the Whitbread's Book of the Year Award in 1996. In the 2010s, two of her other novels, Life After Life and its sequel, A God in Ruins, won the Costa Award for Best Novel of the Year in Britain. She's written 6 books in a series featuring a much-tested private investigator named Jackson Brodie. The earlier books were made into a TV series starring Jason Isaacs. Life After Life also was made into a television series 2 years ago. We're here to talk about her new Jackson Brodie book. It's out now. It's a cause for celebration for Atkinson's and for Jackson's many fans. It's called Death at the Sign of the Rook. Kate Atkinson, welcome to the Book Review Podcast.
Oh, thank you. Very nice to be here.
What brought you back to Jackson Brodie after all these years? You wrote the first 4 books in the series, kind of one after the other, and then there was a 9-year gap.
I wrote it in lockdown, and it was just a good book to write during lockdown because at the end I was collecting the characters, so they in turn would all be locked down in this house at the end. So, and I think I wanted to write a book that was, it's so funny. And I wanted to write something amusing. I think I just did want to amuse myself in lockdown. And for years and years, I've said that I was going to write a murder mystery. I think every time I've ever done an event, people say, what are you writing next? And I go, well, I'm writing this murder mystery and I never do it. So I thought, right, now's a good time.
And it had been percolating for a long time. I know I'd even heard the title at least 10 years ago. You had mentioned it. And so was this a case of you had the title and then you figured out what to put in it, or how did it all unfold?
I always have a title a long time before I write a book. And I knew that this was the murder mystery title. So yeah, so it's really just a case of letting it ferment a bit in your brain, I think, before it's ready to be, I don't know, cooked.
The book features elements that are truly farcical, and also has a knowingness about its own farce. It makes fun of itself for what it's doing as it does it. There's a vicar who's lost his voice, a soldier who's lost his leg, a spot of art theft, some aristocrats, a large mansion, and a snowstorm. Did you want to put in stock characters and then make them unstock characters at the same time? What was going on?
That was the intention. So if you have a classic Christie, you're going to have the bluff old major and often the military man, often the vicars, and often the vicars in Christie, and a detective, of course. So I wanted to take all of those stock characters and then do something different with them and make them human, I suppose, make them much more like real people than just those ciphers, because I think that those classic golden age crime novels, they just use characters as very flat things to move around, so for the purpose of the plot. And I really love characters, so I really wanted to invest them with real meaning, I think, real feeling, I suppose.
And also you have several characters in the book who are reading a golden age mystery novelist who you've invented, who to my mind sounds like a subpar Agatha Christie. And they know exactly what she's doing while they're doing it themselves in some way. Where did this fake, not quite Agatha Christie come from? And I wonder also if you read a lot of Agatha Christie as a young person.
I read a huge amount of Agatha Christie when I was young, because I read everything when I was young. I was one of those one of those children. And I still occasionally read Agatha Christie because I do admire her ability to plot. I think I'm just in awe of anyone who can plot, quite honestly. I find plotting so hard. And I think Nancy Styles, that's her name, isn't it? Which is after Styles, which is the house and one of her books. And
The Mysterious Affair at Styles, right? Isn't that her first book? Yeah.
And Sophie, the housekeeper art thief in the book, is called Sophie Greenway after her house down in Devon, Agatha Christie's house in Devon. And the two Labradors, Lady Milton's Labradors, are Tommy and Tuppence after two of her parents. So I put lots of things in. It's a very self-referential book, much more than I would normally do, because I just felt it was a slightly unhinged book and it could carry that kind of, not exactly irony, but just knowingness, I think. I think that's the term you used. I think it knows what it's trying to do itself. It's almost like the novel is a character in the book.
I'm surprised to hear you say that you find plotting difficult. I think one of the things... Well, as a reader, I'm so impressed often by how complicated your plots are, how multi-stranded they are, how you set something aside and always come back to it at the end. And I wonder, when you think of your most complicated books, how did you manage to keep the plot going and all these things going at the same time? Do you map it out in advance? Do you do it as you're going along?
I don't map anything out in advance. The only things I write down really are timelines, but that's after the fact, really. That's when I'm stuck in a timeline. And truthfully, I keep it all in my head, because as soon as something is plotted or written down, it doesn't move forward for me. I think it's hard. It's a really hard way of doing it, because you are constantly thinking about it and trying to make it work and getting stuck in it. I get very stuck. I get very frustrated by that method of plotting, because I would so like to have this huge chart on the wall where everything makes sense and you move the things around on it and you go, oh yes, that belongs there. It really is in my head. And I used to call it the big piece of paper. So it would be a big piece of paper and I would just put everything on and see how it looked. But I'm actually waiting on a thumb joint replacement and I can't pen. So not only can I not sign books at the moment, but I can't do any kind of note taking at all. And it has made me realize that before I've gone, oh, no, I never take notes. Everything's in my head. It has made me realize I do take notes, but they're a very specific kind of note. And not being able to do it has been really difficult, actually, because I've not for the Rook, but as we call it, but for the book I'm writing at the moment has been really hard, because I've had to move things around in it a lot and I've never been able to really keep track of it. So I just feel at the moment, and I often feel this, I have to say, that all I'm doing is cutting and pasting and moving things around. And I think that's, to me, why I kind of shiver at the idea of plotting, because it is quite manual, in fact. And every book is different. Every book is completely different. Every book is a learning experience. So there wasn't that sense of the great intricacy of it. And at the same time, in lockdown, I was writing Shrines of Gaiety as well. So that was a way of just stopping and doing something else and having the relief of a completely different book. And I did take on more than I could handle, I think.
I felt like you were having so much fun in this book. I wondered if it was a new era of funness for you. Maybe that's the wrong thing to say, but I was so heartened. I mean, when you go back to Jackson Brodie, who I have followed religiously ever since he emerged, you've put him through so much. He's had every woman he's ever met is angry at him. They steal from him. He's been in a coma. He's had one bad thing happen to him after another. And your books are really characterized by a mix of humor and tragedy. And this book, to me, was the one with the least amount of tragedy in it. Obviously, there are a few people die, but
I do think it was to do with lockdown, because I knew this would, as a concept, that this book would be fun. And I did. I did have fun. It was fun. That doesn't mean there's a new whole fun Atkinson out there waiting, but I think I invested it with a bit more of that kind of glam. And also, nothing bad. I don't think anything bad happens to Jackson in this, does it? I can't think of anything. He gets stuck in an attic, but that's only very brief. I think he manages without being knocked unconscious or having a fight with anyone.
Well, that poor other man you introduced, who was so handsome and attractive, got coshed on the head. And of course, he'd lost his leg earlier in the war. And he seems to have had a couple of concussions and maybe doesn't end up as bright intellectually as he had been before? What's going to happen to him, do you think?
I think he's absolutely fine. I think he recovers completely because I did like him a lot, and because he's kind of rugged hero type, but he doesn't really, at the end, he manages to become heroic again. He does get knocked on the head. No, I think he's absolutely fine. I just never quite wrote that in at the end.
Going back all the way to 1996, when you had published your first novel, Behind the Scenes at the Museum, and won this amazing British Literary Award in 1996 for the best book of the year. I went back and read some of the press around there at the time. And of course, it was your first book. No one had heard of you before. It was shocking how much of the press hit on a theme of who is this person that we've never heard of, and why does she deserve an award, and why did she beat Salman Rushdie's The Moor's Last Sigh and a biography of Gladstone by Roy Jenkins. I know you've spoken a lot about that time, but I wonder, when you look back on it, how do you see what happened then, and how has it affected the course of your career since then?
I am really surprised in retrospect how much attention was given to it. And I just think, was this a particularly slow news week that they needed to make the Whitbread into more of a news item? Because now you can win the Booker and it passes by everybody entirely. It's the literary prizes here are not news. But that was, I suppose, the Salman Rushdie element of it kind of caught their attention. And I do remember beforehand, because there were 5 books in contention in different categories, poetry and biography. And I remember someone saying, "Oh, what do you think your chances are? Your chances are so slim, basically." And I'm like, well, there's 5 books. They're all out. One of them's going to win. I never really saw it like that, because I was very naive about publishing. It was very quick, really, from it coming out in hardback to it going into paperback and going on to win. So I hadn't done any events. I had done no publicity because nobody wanted to know, because it was an unknown writer. So I hadn't had that kind of baptism of fire. And we did post the prize. We did, for some reason, I never understand, a lot of interviews. And now we would be infinitely more selective about it. But I
think the publisher wanted publicity. I mean, they were so excited that you'd won. Yeah.
They'd never won a literary prize before. They're a commercial publisher. I'm still with them. They're a commercial publisher. And they'd never won a literary prize. They always used to say, "We sell books, we don't win prizes." And suddenly they won a prize. And I think that was a bit shock. I think it was as much a shock to them as it was to me, actually. Probably less of a shock to me, in a way.
Hilary Mantel wrote a piece about it in the London Review of Books that felt to me like a rousing defense of you and a scolding of all the things that had happened. And she said your book made most English fiction look chlorotic, green-sick, an exhausted swooner fanning herself in the twilight of a tradition. Just when you think you've begun to understand how her book works, she will undeceive you. She's not so much standing on the shoulders of giants as darting between their legs and waving their own agenda. Did you ever meet her and talk to her about her piece?
I met her incredibly briefly after the Whitbread, because she was one of the judges. We had a kind of a slight relationship. I always admired her capacity to put things in words and not just in books. I look at her now and I think she was always up for a fight.
But you have made a real decision to remain apart from the London literary world. You live in Edinburgh. You don't really participate in lots of festivals or do reviews and things like that. Was that partly a response to what happened to you with that initial book?
I don't think so. I mean, the fact that I don't live there is a huge factor, so that I never get invited to things. So maybe if I lived there, I would get invited to things. And everyone's told me how old I was when I won the Whitbread. I was 43. And in a way, although I don't think of it as starting late, I kind of did. And I think I just haven't prioritized writing, because there's a lot of books I want to write. And if I'm doing all that sociable stuff, which I don't really enjoy, then it cuts into your writing in all sorts of different ways.
You did the BBC radio program Desert Island Discs a few years back, and I was so struck by the fact that you said you thought you'd be quite happy on a desert island, in part because you quite like being alone.
I think I'm a very solitary person, and I just don't enjoy all that kind of chat. Sometimes when I do go out and do it, I'm like, whoa, and the whole world out there and people just speaking to each other all the time. But I'm happier being in my own nest and thinking about my own writing. I'm an only child, so you learn very young either to go mad or to embrace it. And I was a very early reader, so I was always, still pretty happy not having too much traffic with the outside world.
In Desert Island Disc, for people here who haven't heard it, you're invited to choose the pieces of music you would most like to have with you were you ever to be on a desert island by yourself for eternity. And I wondered, I feel like it's something that many British people have been hoping all their lives they would get to make that choice. Had you thought of your pieces of music beforehand, had changed it around?
I had my 8 records for years, but they change all the time. Even now I'm thinking, darn, I would have a completely different list now if I did it again.
And they give you on that program the complete works of Shakespeare and the Bible, and they ask you if you'd like another book. They let you bring another book, and you said you wanted the complete works of Emily Dickinson, her poems and her letters.
And in my memory, I chose the complete works of the metaphysical poets. So it just shows. I was equally, I just thought either the metaphysicals or Emily Dickinson would take so much unraveling mentally that it would keep you occupied. Whereas if you take a novel, that's it. You read it once, you know it. But I mean, with Emily Dickinson, I don't know. My agent recently gave me a really good 3-volume set of the complete poems. And I had realized that I thought I had the complete poems, but I didn't. These are all annotated. I thought I'll read a poem a day, but that's gone by the wayside. And then I was thinking, God, those early poems are rubbish. So I haven't yet got to, I love Emily Dickinson's poetry. I think she's an amazing poet, but she's obviously quite, she was an extraordinary interior person. She got off doing any housework. She stayed in her room. She never answered the door. This was like, my work is serious. And I think I think that's one of the things I admire most about her isn't so much her poetry, it's her lifestyle, her determination to write poetry, to be
and a reflection of her inner life, not a lot of extraneous stuff. And of course, one of the titles of one of your Jackson Brodie books comes from a poem of hers.
A long time, I wanted to write a novel that had an Emily Dickinson first line as the title for no good reason apart from to amuse myself. And that's the reason in that book that Jackson gets a dog.
Because the title is Started Early, Took My Dog, right? So you had that title first, and then you had to find a book to fit into it.
It's just, I heard a fly buzz when I died. That's the title. And I thought that's not going to really make people want to read that book. But dogs, I started early, took my dog. It sounds very intriguing. He gets a dog. He also has a very uncharacteristic liking for Emily Dickinson poetry in that book, just to make some reason for the title, which he's never read an Emily Dickinson poem since, it has to be said, or even mentioned her. But my titles don't always look as if they belong with the books that they're with, I have to say.
A lot of your books do feature dogs. I wonder, do you have a dog?
No, I don't. We have a dog in the family. My eldest daughter has a dog, so I get some dog time. It's a long time since I've had a dog. Always had cats. No longer. Cats gone too. Really like dogs. And dogs really like me. They're one of those instances. I think I have dog pheromones.
You mentioned that you were an only child, and I know you grew up in Yorkshire, in the north of England, and your parents weren't literary. They were working class. Is that the right way to describe them?
They were shopkeepers, different. They came from the working class, as the English love their class system. But shopkeepers are all aspirational. Shopkeepers are transitional. They change class. They become middle class. So a working class parent is going to end up with a middle class child because you make sure they're educated.
Did they keep books at home that you started with?
My father had books. He had things like the Reader's Digest condensed novels, which I'm very fond of. I really used to enjoy reading those. You had the classics, but you look at the books that children have now, and it's just unbelievable cornucopia. But you didn't have that when I was a child. So I did read the same books again and again.
So Alice in Wonderland, Enid Blyton, that sort of thing?
Not Enid Blyton. No, I never liked her. I read one Noddy book and I thought, this isn't for me. But Wind in the Willows and all the fairy stories, I really loved fairy stories. I think they had a very deep influence on my writing in some way.
In what way?
I think because they made me appreciate fantasy, that a piece of writing, a text does not have to reflect the actual world as it is, because that would be something else. That would be a documentary type of writing, so that you are given freedom for crazy things to happen. And you can modify the world in any way you want. I think that was an important lesson. So, I mean, all childhood literature's like that. It's all crazy. If you look at it, it's just mad. There's the animals that are talking and the people that are doing wild things. It's interesting how much, certainly classic children's literature, just cranks up the imagination of a child in a way that I wonder if it's entirely healthy. Because it's a whole other world there that I don't know, to even have it. I think it gives you an understanding. There's the possibility of other worlds. There's a kind of quantum mechanics about children's fiction. That there are other realities, there are other worlds, and you can make them if you write. I think that's the thing, because what a writer does, a writer creates a little world. A book is a world, and I think you get to be God for the space of a book, and I think that's really a powerful motivator.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Book Review Podcast. I'm Sarah Lyall, and I'm speaking with a British writer, Kate Atkinson. In 2013, you published Life After Life, which some people think of as your masterpiece. And it's a book in which the main character repeatedly dies, is born again, isn't fully aware of her previous lives, although she has a sort of intuition often of something weird going on. And it's really a book in many ways about trying to improve on the past and change the future. The year it was published, it was on the New York Times' 10 Best Books of the Year list. And we recently did a Best Novels of the 21st Century so far, and it appeared as number 51. And I wonder, when you look back on it, do you feel like that was a big leap forward for you in your progression of books?
I always was wanting to write Life After Life. I wasn't sure about what structure it was, but I wanted to write about the war. But I wasn't ready. So in a way, Jackson was just a way of passing time until I was ready to tackle that really big topic.
This is World War II we're talking about, yeah.
But the book I really wanted to write was the one that came after, which is A God in Ruins. And in a way, Life After Life is my way of rehearsing for that. In a way that, as a reader, you probably couldn't see or understand. But
can you explain that a little bit? What do you mean by that?
Well, Life After Life, I felt I had to be ready to write about the war and to be able to tackle it seriously. So, and to give it its heft that it deserved. But what I really wanted to write about was the bomber campaign, which is in the book after, A God in Ruins. It's not true. I wanted to write both of them. They go together for me. One is the campaign on the land, if you like. It's the Blitz. And the other one is really the people who are also creating the Blitz, but in the other country. And I think I always, in my mind, thought A God in Ruins was a better book. Well, I still do. Nobody else does, but that's fine. It's a much better book as far as writing is concerned, I think. People love the structure of Life After Life.
Well, it's so cleverly, going back to plot again, it's so cleverly plotted. I mean, you really are disciplined in how you pick up things and change them a little bit, but not entirely, from version after version.
I have to say something here that will shock you, because every single time I say it, people go, no. It's really easy to write. There was no plotting. She lives, she dies, she lives, she dies. I had this wonderful rhythm that just went on, because I knew where I was going. I was going into the Blitz, which is the heart of the book, and that's kind of the horror. And then I was moving away from it. And I knew every life she would learn, because all fiction is about coming to self-knowledge. Everything is about that. And I think it was easy. It was one of the easiest books I've ever written. I know, it's shocking.
I've always thought that your title the title of your first book, Behind the Scenes at the Museum, was a sort of perfect encapsulation of what you're talking about, which is the outside image that is being shown to everyone and what's really going on inside and underneath. Can you talk a little bit about how that title came about, what you were doing with that?
I'm trying to think. I wrote a story, but I can't think. It was called Snow Feathers, and that was the chapter where Gillian dies. And I knew that I needed I wanted to write a novel, but I wasn't in a place in my life where that seemed possible. So I was writing bits and pieces of stories, and I had the whole arc of it. I knew I wanted it to be about family. And originally I wanted to start with the Stone Age and end at the end of the world. And I thought, no, it evolved into there being an object in every chapter that then had another meaning. It was about small individual histories against a much bigger background, but I didn't think of it like that. I just thought of it as like something I wanted to write. Maybe I needed to write. And I think in that original one, Snow Feathers, that chapter, that was when, you know how writing groups and people always say, oh, you have to find your voice. Oh my God, just they had coaxed the entire time. And I remember thinking, oh, that's my voice. And I think that gave me the confidence to think of it as a novel, but it was still stories. And I won that. I went to that prize giving I won a different prize giving when I ran a different story, which has nothing to do with behind the scenes. And I took my friend Maureen and I said, I need to find an agent, right? And there were agents at this prize giving, and Judith Murdoch, who was my first agent, came up to me and said, do you have a novel in the drawer? Which is, I'm like, well, it's not in the drawer, it's in my head. I can give you 3 chapters. I can give you the first 3 chapters. And she had an auction and Transworld bought it. And that was that. And it went from being an incredibly long, slow process to being very fast at the end. And it was a bit of a, like, oh, okay. And the whole journey for behind the scenes was strangely fast, and winning the Whitbread and all of that. It just happened very quickly at the end. But I'd thought about that book for a very long time. But I had a dream about, it was a great museum in York, my hometown. There's 2 great museums. There's the best museum in the world, which is the National Railway Museum. And talk to me about trains and I'm off. And the other one is a folk museum. And I knew that museum really well because my father used to take me from a very young age. We used to go there. And I had this dream. I was walking on my own in the dark through that museum. And every time I passed through one of the rooms, everything came to life. And I woke up and I thought, that dream was called Behind the Scenes at the Museum. I've never had a dream with a title. I've never had such a helpful dream. And I thought, oh, that's the title of the novel. So it obviously came from a very deep place. And then my good old Transworld said, oh, it sounds like it's a book that belongs in a library. Maybe you could think of a different title. And I was like, oh, well, if you can think of one, because I was so not in control of my writing career at that point. But they went with it in the end. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? I had always thought there was a real museum exhibit that you'd seen. I didn't realize you dreamed it. That's so wonderful.
I know.
And it sounds a little bit like, I don't know if you ever saw those kids' movies, Night at the Museum, where it's not quite the same as your novel.
I don't know if you have the children's writer Jan Penkovsky, but he used to do these when my children were small, these pop-up books, and it was very much like that. Suddenly the fire came to life, the horse started moving, that kind of thing. So it was very, very
It feels very Alice in Wonderland, doesn't it? I mean, that's all about a dream and things, cards, for example, coming to life.
Yes, and what is surreal behind reality, I think. It was a useful dream.
Your detective, Jackson Brodie, has a saying, coincidence is an explanation waiting to happen. And I wonder if that is something you've come across in your own life.
Well, I do think there's a lot of coincidence in life. Writing is about coincidence. There'd be no novels if it wasn't a coincidence. And I think there really would be no fiction without coincidence. And I think I quite like taking it to the limit in a way. But I do think there's probably things that happen in life that are much more outrageous that you would never believe that are actually true when it comes to coincidence than anything that you find in a novel. So,
and maybe it's not always quite coincidence, but it's things that happen where if you hadn't been walking in that place at the time, or if you hadn't met this one person, you wouldn't have met the other person who you ended up marrying or whatever. Maybe that's a little bit of it as well.
Yeah, those paths not taken. If you start thinking about them, you go mad, I think. And so I think these things also just gather around each other in a way.
You've said also that you often have a number of books going through your head at the same time. How does that work for you? And how do you, given that you're not writing things down, especially not now, I'm very sorry about your thumb. Painful thumb is terrible. How do you keep them all straight in your head? And what's sort of mulling around in your head now?
Well, anything that's sort of at the back of my head is not troubling me because I'm not actively thinking about it. I'm just passively letting it do whatever it wants to do, just be brought into the light when it's appropriate, I think. So, I mean, at the moment, I'm writing a book set in 1951. It's interesting. I'm 51 of a New York Times bestseller because I'm obviously obsessed by the year of my birth. I think transcription was set in 51. We had in this country, not this country, I'm in Scotland, but in England, in Britain, they would be annoyed with me, the people who did this festival, for saying that. In Britain, we had the Festival of Britain in 1951, which was a kind of a post-war, let's move forward kind of thing. There's a lot of design, a lot of geology went into it. But a huge amount of design exhibits. It was immensely popular and it's completely very ephemeral. Got taken down the day it finished, and there's only one building left that was the festival hall is the only building left from that. And I don't know how I started thinking this would make a good novel, because that's where novels start. You just think, that would be a great novel. And you have to really hang on to that thought, because there's time, months and months down the line, when you're thinking, why did I think this would make a great novel? But with this, I must have had that thought at some point and thought this would make a great novel. And I just read a lot about it, and I just thought there was so much eccentricity attached to it that I just
attached to the festival.
We had something called the Eccentrics Corner in the Lion and Unicorn Pavilion. It's an incredibly patriotic sort of festival, and in which they had a call out for people to send things in that they thought would fit well in the Eccentrics Corner. So everyone in Britain was sending in these ludicrous ideas. There was a rubber bus. There was a smoke grinding machine. I was so obsessed with the smoke grinding machine. How? What? Why? And there was things like that, ridiculous things. And I think I just caught onto the ridiculous element of it, because the book I'm writing I think it doesn't have a murder in it, but it's not a really serious book. And I think I just wanted to write about those ridiculous things. So I haven't written about all the weighty topics that the Festival of Britain was really about, which was about Britain starting again up after the war and showing Britain to itself very much. This is our industry. And it was hanging on to something, because there was a huge number of exhibitions about things like thatching and all of these things that were just about to go. So there was an element of kind of nostalgia about it, but also maybe just not seeing the future. We'd just been through a war that was very technological, but we'd had Bletchley, we'd had a computer. We invented a computer that could do amazing things, and we sold it to the Americans after the war. We decided there was no future in computers. So it was the future in thatching and showing cows in the milking parlor. And it was just, I just got a bit obsessed by it. So that's actually what I'm working on. And then I'm going to write a book called The Great Wonder of the North, which is the very beginnings of the railway in 1800-something, probably won't go beyond 1820. So I've never gone that far back. It gives you a lot of freedom. I've written the first little chapter and put it away. But I don't feel like, I feel like that as far as dialogue goes or plot or anything, I have real freedom by going back that far. I don't have to, I know how people spoke in 1951, and I feel I have to put dialogue in that reflects that. I think I can just have people speaking any way I want in 1820.
I might be wrong about this, but it's always struck in my head. I think that the day this railway line was introduced to in Britain, there was a great big celebration, and then somebody was hit by the train.
Atkinson, who was a minister in the government, was just stepped out and was killed by the train that was going, I think, at about 5 miles an hour. But it's not that. It's the very, very first passenger carrying train that I'm interested in, which happened near Middlesbrough in the north, and nobody was killed. It's interesting to me because I love trains, but having to know that I've got research ahead of me that's going to be very difficult, because I'm really going to have to come to terms with steam and engine.
Well, what was the Festival of Britain? A steam invention machine? What was that thing you said? The
smoke grinding machine.
Smoke grinding. It really sounds like a parody, doesn't it? I mean, all your books are characterized. I'm always struck by incredible juxtaposition of tragedy and humor in them. A lot of parentheticals, a lot of people being in a situation and having a little dialogue with themselves where they comment on it at the same time. I wonder if that's how your mind works as well. Are you commenting all the time to yourself?
I'm actually trying to cut down on the parentheticals. I think there's too many of them. But and going for more like open, direct speech. But I think it's because I write from inside a character's head. So there's bound to be commentary because you comment on yourself. Well, I comment on myself to myself all the time. So I think that's how most people's brains work.
But it's also maybe it's an effort to see the sort of humor or absurdity in things that can be very hard.
There is commenting on that. I think, yes, there's a lot of kind of awareness of the blackness of a situation, I think, or the irony of a situation. So I don't know how that whole comedy tragedy thing works, because I once tried to write something that didn't have that contrast, that light and shade, and just was serious. And I couldn't do it. So, I tried. So I need that to and fro. I don't know how it works. It's very unintentional. I don't go, oh, well, that was a serious bit. We need a funny bit now. Or we're in the middle of something serious. Let's have a funny it's just not like that. I think it comes from within the characters so that it flows more naturally than something that's planned.
Did your parents live to see your first bits of writing published?
My mother did. I buried my father the week that I won the Whitbread, but he'd been ill for a very long time and his mind wasn't really there for a long time. So I don't think he understood that. And also because it happened very quick at the end. So he was already just bedridden and not really compos mentis. So only my mother.
And what did your mum think of your work?
I just don't think she understood. She wasn't a reader. She always felt I'd had a lot more education than her, so that I took after my father. I was clever. And I think she was scared of that, I think. So having a book published, I'm sure she did amongst her friends and her peer group kind of, she didn't understand publishing. She didn't understand writing. She didn't understand books. So it was all a bit like off to the side there of like, why are you doing that? She did at one point after the Whitbread say, why don't you get a proper job? It wasn't in her worldview, I don't think. I don't know. I'm sure she was proud of me. She just had no language to say it in.
You've talked before about secrets in your family, and one of the most resonant secrets was that you didn't even know really the story of your parents and your birth, and that you learned, I think in your 30s, that your parents had not been married when you were born.
You can have I don't know what it's like now, but you can have a short birth certificate or you can have a long one. And the short one is pretty much where you were born and what your name is. And then the long one has your parents on and their profession as well, and a lot more detail. And I needed a long one to get a passport. I must have had a passport, but I needed a long one and I didn't understand it. I was working for a lawyer at the time, and I took it to him and I said, what does this mean? It says, like, my mother's got this other name, like it's formally whatever. And he said, it means she was married before. And I said, she wasn't married before. And then I went to the registry office. You can request certificates. So I requested my parents' marriage certificate. And then that's when I discovered that they were married a while after I was born. And then I requested my mother's original marriage certificate. So I was doing all this detective work around her because I think my main thought was, is my father actually my father? It looked more like something marriage after the fact, and obviously they hadn't got married because she was already married to this man that she'd married during the war, who has never been mentioned once ever in my mother's family ever. And she refused to talk about him. And that was very famously, we were watching Charles and Di getting married, and I had my youngest daughter on my knee, and she was very small. And I said to my mother, I thought, this is a good opportunity. It was me and my mother. Never said that you'd been married before. And she just has the great classic line of all time, which was, I was going to tell you, but you left the room. Also, in many ways, summed my mother up in some strange way. I don't know. Obviously, it had been a horror to her, that first marriage, I think. And probably even more of a horror to her to be pretending to be married to my father when she had me, because she would have been, I think they were pretending to be married.
Mm-hmm. And you had to be, because you would be so looked down on by your neighbors if you were unmarried and had a child.
It's not what you did in 1951.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
there must have been a lot of shame and fear of being, I mean, their friends, they had shopkeeping friends, different class, who were more sophisticated than them, more sophisticated, certainly. And I think at least one or two of them were like mentors to my father. And I think he had a infinitely more sophisticated worldview of that kind of thing than my mother did, I think. I don't know. It's not a period of love she would talk about. And if someone doesn't want to talk about something, you're not going to really just needle them into it.
Of course.
I don't really know what went down.
You and I spoke right before Life After Life was published in the United States. And I remember really talking to you about one thing that you do to your readers, which is to make us really care about what happens to your characters, almost as if they're people. And I know they're not real people, but maybe that's the bind I'm in as a reader, is I care too much. Maybe the way a child cares reading a child's story. And you said at the time something like, well, to me, they're mostly, you didn't say pawns, but they're mostly ways to talk about things I want to talk about. And I don't really see them as people. And you seem to be saying you didn't really care about Jackson Brodie either.
Well, that sounds very cruel. I don't think that's the case, because I think if I want to read, yes, to care about a character, then I will have to care about that character. You can't just make someone care by being the puppeteer, I don't think. So I think that might have changed writing Life After Life, because I knew that Teddy was going to be a very important character in his own book, and everybody loves Teddy, and I love Teddy, and I think it was very important that he had that emotional weight to him. And I think I do sound very glib, don't I? Because I know from my own reading, I think I have never yet got over the death of Ginger in Black Beauty, and to be able to move a reader like that is a gift, I think. And lots of people say to me, when they got to the end of God in Ruins, they were just in pieces and bits. They were crying.
I certainly was. You really did a number on me with that book.
And I think, yes, as a cruel writer, that is exactly what I want you to feel. But at the same time, I also feel that. So it is a two-way process. I think I learned very early on when I was writing magazine stories that if you don't put yourself in there, somehow, even if it's the most commercial, trivial, light-hearted romance, if you don't have that voice, your voice in there somehow, then I don't know, it's not as pointless. It's not serious, even if it's trivial. And I think you have to care. And yes, there are characters I care more about. And I am very careless with Jackson. I'm aware of that, because I'm just like, oh, on you go, do your thing. I know that you're going to do whatever. So,
will we be seeing him again at some point, do you think?
Well, I have no immediate plans, which really upsets people when I say that. I would like to send him on a cruise ship. And I think that would be a very good thing for Jackson to do. You know, someone's overboard, he's got to go and find out.
Oh, I love that idea, because it's always so hard when people go overboard to investigate that, isn't it?
I know. And it's an incredibly common problem, because it happens in international waters and people are going overboard all the time. So I was the guest on board the Queen Mary doing an Atlantic crossing, and it was an eye-opener, because I hadn't realized they're just floating old people's homes, and they're just, I think the florist had filled up with bodies because the mortuary had run out. You could see the widows lining up at the end. It was so many old people. And I think, well, would you throw yourself? It's a thing, isn't it? Just throw yourself off in the middle of the Atlantic. It's a thought.
It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for filling me with delight again. I loved this book so much.
I should make an effort to make you cry.
Kate Atkinson, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
That was Sarah Lyall in conversation with Kate Atkinson about her new book, Death at the Sign of the Rook. I'm Gilbert Cruz, editor of the New York Times Book Review. Thanks for listening.